Vanessa Carter sat quietly inside the attorney's office in downtown Chicago, staring at the stack of papers in front of her. The room was cold, silent, and painfully formal. Her husband, Richard Carter, sat across from her, wearing the same expensive gray suit he wore to board meetings. He looked impatient, like this was just another task he needed to finish before lunch. After 18 years of marriage, this was how it ended. No shouting, no tears, no begging, just signatures. Richard slid the papers toward her without even making eye contact. "Once you sign, we can finally move on," he said coldly. Vanessa nodded slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. She could still remember the days when Richard used to hold those same hands tightly during difficult times, back when they were struggling together in a small apartment in Ohio, before the money, before the fame, before he became someone she no longer recognized. She signed every page calmly. Richard's lawyer looked relieved. Richard himself barely reacted. In fact, he leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man who believed he had won. Vanessa closed the folder gently and stood up. "That's it?" Richard asked casually. "That's it," she replied softly. He gave a short laugh. "Honestly, Vanessa, this is probably the best thing for both of us." Vanessa looked at him for a few seconds. She wanted to ask him when exactly he stopped loving her. Was it when his tech company started making millions? Was it when younger women began following him around at business events? Or was it when he started acting embarrassed by the woman who stood beside him before anyone knew his name? But she said nothing. She simply picked up her purse and walked out. Outside the building, heavy rain poured onto the Chicago streets. Vanessa stood under the entrance canopy waiting for her rideshare. Across the street, reporters were already gathering. Richard's divorce had quietly leaked to a local business blog, and now several photographers waited nearby, hoping to catch photos. Richard walked out minutes later with his legal team behind him. He smiled confidently once he noticed the cameras. One reporter shouted, "Richard, did the divorce settlement go smoothly?" Another yelled, "Was infidelity involved?" Richard adjusted his suit calmly. "I wish Vanessa the best," he said with practiced professionalism. Vanessa heard him from a distance and nearly laughed. The best. After years of emotional neglect, humiliation, and loneliness, now he wished her the best. A black SUV suddenly pulled up beside the sidewalk. The driver stepped out holding an umbrella. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked respectfully. Vanessa looked surprised for a moment. "Yes, your transportation has arrived." Richard glanced over casually at first, expecting an ordinary ride. But his expression changed the moment he saw the logo on the driver's jacket. Several reporters noticed it too. "Wait, isn't that Hawthorne Aviation?" one photographer whispered. Richard frowned immediately. Hawthorne Aviation was one of the largest private aviation companies in America, owned by billionaire investor Daniel Hawthorne. The driver opened the SUV door for Vanessa carefully. Richard suddenly stepped closer. "What is this?" Vanessa looked at him calmly. "A ride." Before Richard could respond, another vehicle arrived behind the SUV. Two security personnel stepped out and began clearing photographers away from the curb. Now everyone was staring. A reporter rushed forward. "Vanessa, are you connected to Daniel Hawthorne?" Vanessa remained quiet. Richard's face tightened. "Since when do you know Daniel Hawthorne?" Vanessa finally looked directly at him. "Since before you stopped paying attention to your own wife." Those words hit harder than she intended. Richard stood frozen. For years, Vanessa had quietly volunteered at charity fundraising events across Chicago while Richard built his empire. Most of the time, Richard never attended with her. He claimed he was too busy. One evening, 2 years earlier, Vanessa had met Daniel Hawthorne during a children's hospital fundraiser. Unlike most wealthy men in the room, Daniel had spoken to her kindly. He asked about her interests, her work, and her life. He treated her like a person instead of decoration. Over time, they became friends. Nothing inappropriate happened during her marriage. Vanessa had been loyal despite everything, but Daniel saw the sadness she tried to hide. He saw how invisible she had become inside her own marriage. When Vanessa finally decided to divorce Richard 6 months earlier, Daniel became one of the few people who supported her emotionally without judging her. Richard had no idea, because Richard never noticed anything anymore. The SUV drove Vanessa toward a private airfield outside the city. She stared silently through the rain-covered windows, emotionally exhausted. Part of her felt guilty, not for leaving Richard, but for staying so long. 18 years was a long time to spend trying to convince someone to value you. At the private terminal, staff greeted her warmly. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," one attendant said politely. Vanessa nodded nervously as she entered. Then she saw the jet. Large, white, elegant. The Hawthorne aviation logo was painted near the tail. She stopped walking for a moment. Daniel Hawthorne himself stepped down from the aircraft stairs wearing dark jeans and a navy coat. Despite being one of the richest men in the country, he looked surprisingly simple in person. "You made it," he said warmly. Vanessa smiled faintly for the first time that day. "I almost turned back twice." Daniel walked closer slowly. "That's normal." She looked down. "I feel strange." "You're not strange," he replied gently. "You're just finally free." Vanessa's eyes watered instantly. Not because of the jet. Not because Daniel was wealthy. But because someone had finally spoken to her with care again. Back at the courthouse, videos of Vanessa entering the Hawthorne SUV had already exploded online. By evening, business blogs and entertainment pages were all discussing the same thing. Richard Carter's ex-wife had apparently left her divorce hearing and boarded a billionaire's private jet hours later. Speculation spread everywhere. But what hurt Richard most was not the public embarrassment. It was realization. For the first time in years, he sat alone in his penthouse and thought about Vanessa seriously. He remembered the birthdays he forgot, the dinners he canceled, the nights she cried quietly thinking he was asleep. He remembered how loyal she had been while he became colder and colder, and now she was gone, completely gone. Meanwhile, thousands of feet above the clouds, Vanessa sat quietly beside the jet window as the sun slowly broke through the storm. Daniel handed her a cup of coffee. "No reporters up here," he joked softly. Vanessa laughed quietly. Then she looked out the window again. For years, she thought surviving marriage meant enduring pain silently. She thought loyalty meant sacrificing herself completely. But sitting there above the clouds, she realized something important. Sometimes leaving peacefully is the strongest thing a person can do. She had signed the divorce papers calmly, but the woman boarding that jet was no longer the broken wife Richard once ignored.